Could you just give us a little bit of your background? It's too robust for me to paraphrase it. I'd just love to hear from you about your experiences and what
No
got you here.
problem. Yeah. So, as a young adult, I experienced an abusive relationship myself. So, what we would call dating abuse or teen dating violence as a young person. And so, following college, I was kind of lost and, still reeling from what I had experienced myself. And so I was looking for ways to really get involved in the community and give back and get involved, particularly in that cause of violent relationships. And so I found the Domestic Violence Center and I got in touch with them, and I started in 2012 as a volunteer. And I would go out to high schools and colleges in the area and share my experiences and my specific story. And I really enjoyed that experience. And I really enjoyed, going out and seeing the responses and hearing from people who had experienced the same thing as me and feeling like I'm really not alone. It was almost therapeutic for me.
Yeah.
And at the time I had been working in early childhood education. I was teaching kindergarten, and the position opened up in the organization for a full-time children's counselor. And so in 2015, I started with the Domestic Violence Center full-time as their children's counselor.
Wow.
And the more grew into that role, the more ownership I took of a lot of the youth education programs, specifically in the high schools. And we actually, specifically our Coaching Boys into Men program, which you and I had discussed briefly before, and I can talk about that at some point today. But that program really took off, and we were able to find funding through the CDC to make that a full-time program. And we had to kind of do some restructuring because we were really coming up with so many fantastic educational initiatives. And so in 2018, we created the education department here at the Domestic Violence Center. And that was the first time we had something like that here. And so I kind of was lucky enough to grow into the role of the Director of Education Programs. And so now I help support all of our education initiatives and outreach initiatives with the organization.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. And your energy and positivity, and I believe your love for people is such an asset to that role and to
Thank you.
anyone who gets to work with you. And you were just sharing with me a student who was in your early days, right? Was she in your first class?
She was one of my first clients with the agency.
She was.
So
Okay.
yeah.
And now she's a high school senior, and she
Yes.
wants to be a therapist and help people because of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
It's like very humbling to say the least, right?
Yes. And
Yeah.
I think that's such a beautiful thing, because you never really know how wide the ripple effects of human connection and compassion can go. So in this role, you help educate and, inform and probably just equip people with what they need to survive and to help others. How has this pandemic affected domestic violence, and that is one of the things that's heaviest on my heart, is those who are made to stay home and their homes are unsafe. I mean, so can you inform us about what's been going on lately?
Absolutely. So we were fully expecting that, especially with stay-at-home orders put in place, that a lot of people would be isolated at home with their abusers, with the perpetrator of abuse in their home or family. And so that was a concern that we had. We were waiting to see how is this going to affect our services. And so within that first month of the lockdown, the shutdown, what we noticed was from February to March, we saw a 15% increase in our hotline calls, a 16% increase in our LAP calls, which are calls to our hotline from police officers who are on the scene of a domestic disturbance. And the calls have not gone down. So we hit that 15% increase and we've stayed up there with our hotline calls. However, the unfortunate thing that we're seeing is less in-person services. So survivors are less apt to reach out and receive services, to come in to get counseling and things of that nature. And so that's something that we are a little bit concerned about, is whether or not they are being told that they cannot leave their home, if they're fearful to leave their home because of the abuser and things of that nature. We also, with the significant increase in unemployment rates, we know that unemployment is actually what we call a lethality factor. So when it comes to increasing the high danger of these incidents, increasing the likelihood of a fatality, unemployment is one of those risk factors. And so we're seeing a lot of these risk factors exacerbated: isolation, unemployment. And so that's a concern that we've had for, you know, our victim survivors here in Chester County. And another thing that I think that we're a little bit concerned about is that once everything reopens, we are fearful that we are going to be inundated with calls. And so we've made a lot of changes and updates to our services, you know, everything from wearing masks in our communal areas and having regular, an organization regularly come in and disinfect everything, moving half of our shelter residents into hotels throughout Chester County to help with their social distancing, because we were packed in the shelter and there was no way that they were going to be able to appropriately socially distance. And so we were able to set up contracts with local hotels to find families somewhere safe to stay during this. But also just mitigating risk factors, especially for individuals like our legal team, because the courts have still been open, especially for the work that we do. So protection from abuse orders and other, you know, protections that they might need. Our legal advocates and our attorneys were still in the courts every single day, face to face with clients. And so finding the supplies and figuring out, you know, policy shifts and changes that we could make to assure not only the safety of our survivors and our residents, but also the safety of our staff when it came to that. And so I think we did a really good job. And, you know, we've leaned a lot into technology and, you know, telehealth. So a lot of video counseling and phone counseling and things like that. And a lot of our outreach that is usually done in person, going out and speaking to large groups, going out and speaking to small groups, a lot of that was put on hold. And so we've really been taking advantage of opportunities like this to engage with the community virtually.
Good. Oh, thank you for that.
Yeah.
So going back to the unemployment dangers, is it because the abuser is home more, or because there's increased stress, or because they're self-medicating with alcohol and drugs, or kind of a combination of both?
It's definitely a combination of all of those factors, just depending on the household that you're in. So yeah, as you said, I'm sure that we've seen, you know, increased rates of, unfortunately, substance use and abuse. The unemployment adds stressors, having, you know, concerns with income and making ends meet, that can add stressors. And then the isolation is always like a major factor. If I'm isolated from people, if I don't even feel safe in my home to make a hotline call because my, you know, partner is there, and how am I to make this phone call without them finding out? And so that's one thing that's been beneficial, that the national hotline has a texting app that people can use. If they just text "love is" to 22522, they can text right then and there with an advocate. However, it doesn't reach us locally, so that is only the national service.
Okay. And we are going to learn more today about, you know, what are some types of abuse, and what does the cycle look like, and what does it sound like to those of us who are hearing this from a loved one? What should we not say? Because I think that's something that many of us are guilty of. And I think now more than ever, we're learning about our unintentional mistakes, like the things that we haven't been doing on behalf of those who are experiencing abuse of a variety of kinds. We've been thinking mainly lately around racism. But I think it's also true in these cases that we sometimes, with good hearts, want to help, but we actually end up doing more damage than help. So your guidance will be really helpful for us there, and just how to navigate that and how to be the most loving, compassionate people that we can be. So I do want to get into that. And then you brought up the bit about the hotels. So that made my mind go to funding. Like, are, and you can just say you don't want to talk about this, but is the Domestic Violence Center of Chester County funded by the government?
So we're funded through several different ways. We are a nonprofit, and so a majority of our funding comes from, yes, government grants, both statewide grants and then some federal grants. For example, like Coaching Boys into Men, which is funded through the CDC and things like that. And so when it comes to government funding, especially during times of, state and federal crisis, that is something that is always on shaky ground, and something that we always are just hoping continues, but are never 100% sure. And so we do, rely heavily on our community support. So while we have a lot of government and foundations that will support us through grants and programs like that, one of the biggest things that we've seen a significant impact from, especially throughout this pandemic period, is our Chester County community. We are so humbled, really, by the outpouring of support that we've received from this community. Local organizations and local businesses who themselves aren't even, getting the business and the income that they usually would, are shifting their focus on ways to give back. So, we've received so much support, thankfully, through our community, which is something.
Can you just give me one example of what that looks like, Amelia? Like,
I could give you a couple.
You could give me loads.
Yeah. A survivor of our programs donated her entire relief check to the organization during this time. Wow. And then another great example is that a local bar and restaurant, Bar Avalon in Westchester, did this fantastic, huge campaign where they donated 300 meals for a family of 4, like a 3-course meal, to anyone who signed up for one of the meals and came with a check for the organization. So they collected no proceeds from that. 100% of the proceeds came to us. The meals sold out, and they actually raised $15,000 for the organization. Yes, which just completely shocked us, and in such a fabulous and humbling way. And even local gyms, we know that gyms aren't open right now. Gyms have been running virtual, Zumba classes and virtual 5Ks and things like that, just to raise funds here and there. So that's been really impactful in such a fantastic way. And it's really important, especially because one of our biggest fundraisers of the year, our only major fundraiser of the year, is held in March. And unfortunately, we had to cancel that. And so that's one of, our biggest sources of income throughout the year, are the donations that come from that fundraiser. And so that was a big hit.
Is there any way that people can, because I know in those big events, you typically have auctions and live auctions and that, is there still ways that people could contribute or get involved?
So thankfully, last year we shifted our auction so that not only those in person could be bidding on the silent and live auction items, but that those at home could be bidding online. And we were able, again, like I said, to lean into that technology. And we're really excited to be able to announce that we will be still holding our auction as a silent auction.
Oh, good.
All virtually. Yeah. And so the link is shared throughout our social media and our website, and I can share it with you.
Right. I'll put it in the notes.
Yes. And so that will be held throughout the week of June 13th.
Okay.
So that entire week.
Good.
Yeah.
We didn't miss it. All right.
Yes.
Thank you for that. So could you share with us some information? Like, I remember you talking to me about the umbrella of like what is abuse, and just so everybody can get a clearer understanding.
For sure. All right. Can we see this?
Yes, perfectly.
Fantastic. So The first thing I'd like to note is just this staggering statistic that I always have at the top of this slide, which is that 1 in every 3 women and 1 in every 4 men experience some form of domestic violence throughout their lives, but that also 1 in every 3 teens, regardless of their gender identity, will experience some form of abuse in a relationship. So I think that that's really important. And when we think about that, we're like, that's a lot of people. That's a large number of individuals. And so I like to help people understand, because when we hear domestic violence, I think a lot of people think domestic, all right, you have to live together or be married. And they think violence is just physical abuse. And so neither of those are the case. So I want to make sure that everyone understands the types of things that fall under the umbrella of who we serve. So first and foremost, family violence. Any violence or abuse within a family unit. And so this can include child abuse. It also can include what we call abuse in later life, which is commonly referred to as elder abuse. And then in the other end of things, it's something that we call IPV, or intimate partner violence and abuse. So any abuse within an intimate relationship. And then this is where we see dating violence. This is also where we can see some forms of human trafficking, because unfortunately there are intersections between domestic and intimate partner violence and human trafficking. And so these are all different things that we provide services for. And if you'd like me to continue, we can talk a little bit about those types of abuse beyond
I think
physical.
that would be helpful.
Yeah. So while it's not just domestic living together, it's any family violence, any intimate relationship violence, but it's also beyond physical abuse. So yes, physical abuse can and is often a part of it, right? And so in physical abuse, we see things like hitting, kicking, punching, pushing. Strangulation, unfortunately, is a very common form of abuse, but even things like grabbing someone too rough, pinching someone, things of that nature, or things you might not think of, like if I'm threatening, verbally threatening things that I would physically do to hurt you, that's a form of physical abuse. I'm making you feel physically unsafe. If I'm getting angry and I'm throwing things across the room, if I'm picking things up and smashing them, I'm breaking and destroying your belongings, I'm punching a hole in the wall, those are forms of physical abuse and aggression, especially when they're done in a threatening manner, in a way that's meant to intimidate my partner. The next form of abuse that we'll often talk about is verbal abuse. So the words that we use, I think it's really important to understand when we talk about the other forms of abuse, that all abuse is centered around an individual, perpetrator of abuse, wanting to gain and then maintain power and control. Those are the 2 major factors here. And so verbal abuse is a really good way for me to feel more powerful, because it makes my partner feel powerless. And this is where we'll see name calling, putting someone down, making fun of them, criticizing every little thing that they do, so that eventually they might feel like they can't do anything right at all. They might feel like they have to ask, is this good enough? Or can you tell me how to do this after a while? Unfair accusations, maybe constantly accusing them of doing things that they didn't do, things of that nature. So verbal abuse is really about the power. And then this third form of abuse, which is, I think, one of the scariest forms of abuse, because it is so insidious, right? It really starts on the inside and just works its way out. And this is emotional abuse, which is also commonly referred to as psychological abuse. This is where the abuser gets into your head. So verbal abuse is about the power, emotional abuse is about the control. And this is where we will see things like manipulation, mind games, twisting things around. A good term to describe manipulation and mind games in these relationships is gaslighting. And if you're not familiar with that term, it's really doing and saying things to make an individual feel like they are going crazy, doubting themselves, doubting their experience, doubting their feelings about an experience. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it wasn't that big a deal. Maybe it did happen that way. Maybe it didn't happen that way, so on and so forth. a huge part of emotional and psychological abuse is isolation. Like we said, isolation is a major factor. If I isolate you from your support system, it is a lot easier for me to have the control because you're not listening to many other people's say. You're not listening to their opinions. You're not listening to what they might be noticing. They might not even be able to notice things that are happening.
Right.
Controlling behaviors. They want to control where you go, who you talk to, what you wear, what you do, what you're doing on your phone, on your social media. Sometimes they'll even try and control you at work if you're allowed to work, where you can work. They might call you all day at work, things like that. On the other hand, they might at some points make you feel invisible by neglecting you and ignoring you. They might go back and forth, super controlling and possessive, and super neglectful and, ignoring you. Victim blaming, that's a huge form of gaslighting too, and manipulation, is twisting things around. See, if you hadn't said that, I wouldn't have reacted the way that I did. And so really rationalizing their behavior by putting it on the other person. And so as we see here, there are so many more types of abuse, and some that aren't even listed on here: financial abuse and control, digital abuse and control, so on and so forth. And so there's so much more that goes into it aside from physical abuse. And I think that's an important thing to know, because we'll even get survivors calling the hotline saying, listen, I know it's not domestic violence because I've never been hit or, physically abused, and we have to reassure them that, if they're describing significant emotional abuse and control, verbal abuse and control, that is domestic violence. That is, something that we can help with.
Yeah. Oh, that's so helpful for us to have that scope and awareness. And what would you say are some, so people are experiencing these things, they find out about help like Domestic Violence Center of Chester County, and they call, and then what? Like, what happens? Like, what kind of support do they get? And then what do they do? And your point earlier about, like, if the abuser is there and they can't make that call, what else could they do?
Absolutely. So those are great questions. So first, we'll talk about the process of making that first call with the Domestic Violence Center. So we have very comprehensive services. For lack of a better term, and I hate to use this term when talking about domestic violence services, but we really try to be a one-stop shop. So any service that a survivor might need, we want to be able to provide that. And so we have a 24-hour hotline, and that's how most individuals get initially connected with our services. They speak with one of our trained counselors, because that's who is on the other end of that line 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, holidays, weekends, we are there. And so what they'll do is just kind of talk about what they've been experiencing and the needs that they might have, or the concerns that they might have. And our counselors and advocates are really good at thinking through what is the best option for this individual right now. So we have several counseling options, not only individual counseling, but group counseling, support groups, multiple nights a week in both English and Spanish, which is super helpful. We also have a licensed therapist on staff who can help with people who've experienced significant trauma, or might even be suffering from PTSD from the abuse that they've experienced. We also have a fantastic legal team. So a lot of the first step that people take is getting that legal help, is getting a protection order, filing for custody, figuring out what their legal rights are. And so we have 3 full-time staff attorneys and a large and really empowering team of legal advocates who work so tirelessly to help these individuals through every step of what can be like a really confusing legal process of working through that legal jargon, getting through those mounds of paperwork that they might need to go through, and assuring that they're doing everything they need to do to be protected. So that's a huge part of it. We do know that over 97% something percent of survivors cite their most pressing need is housing. And so that's something that we really provide assistance with as well. We do have our emergency crisis shelter for those who are in immediate danger and who really just need somewhere to get right away. We also have a transitional shelter, which is a more long-term stay shelter. It's still communal housing, but it's what we would call, more transitional housing. And then we own 3-bedroom houses and 4 one-bedroom apartments for families and single individuals that need a long-term, more permanent housing option. And we have a housing team that helps, if none of our housing options are available, helps them find something that is suitable and affordable here in Chester County. But we will always say that we fight regularly for more affordable housing for our survivors, because that's a significant need. And then on top of that, we have several donation drives throughout the year. So we do provide support in that way. Even with housing support, with financial housing support, we have a program called the Relocation Program, in which we are allotted a certain amount of money every year to be able to assist someone who's in immediate danger relocate somewhere. So for example, once I had a survivor who called and said, I have nowhere to stay. I have no friends or family to stay with, but I have a sister. She lives in Georgia. If I can get to Georgia, she'll let me stay with her. And so we worked through all the processes. We got documentation from the sister that, yes, if she gets here, she can stay with me. And so we bought her a train ticket, and off to Georgia she went, and confirmed that she got there safely and she was able to start over. And so relocation funding is a huge part of that. We also have children's services.
I was just going to ask you, like, families are welcome to come. It's not just women or just adults.
Exactly. Yes. So families are welcome. We have several families in our housing units, as well as our emergency shelter. At any given time, we have a ton of children running through the building, which is, fantastic. I love that energy in there. Children are just so resilient, and their energy is really so uplifting. And so we have a fantastic children's counseling department and children's service department. So they provide individual counseling for children, not just children who might have been directly abused, but children who have witnessed abuse, because there are significant psychological and emotional impacts that witnessing of abuse has on a child, whether we're aware of it or not. And so having a counselor who understands domestic violence and the effects that it has on children, to be able to help them work through those things, it's a huge an important factor. We also have children's support groups, which is fantastic, for them to be able to build a sense of community and a sense of normalcy almost in their experience, to understand that they are not alone, that there is not something, wrong with them, that they've experienced this in their household. And we've seen a lot of really uplifting and empowering moments where the children do find that sense of community with each other. And then we also try and do like fun recreational things with the kids as well, so that it's not all clinical for them. So a lot of our support groups will bring in, therapy animals, a therapy dog. They do a chicken hatching project where they learn to like nurture and do gentle touch with the chicks. The Westchester Public Library comes in and they do, interactive story times that help the children, use literature to express themselves. We have a music and dance and art group that comes in and does all sorts of stuff with them in that way. We have yoga studios that come in and do yoga with them so their bodies get moving. We've done cooking classes. Once we did like a Clue mystery dinner party.
Oh, neat. They must love that.
They had a blast with that. We were giving them little flutes of sparkling cider, and they were like, I can't drink alcohol.
You're like, I know.
I'm like, it's not alcohol.
It's cider. It's just a celebration. I know.
They're so sweet.
That's adorable.
And then in addition to all that, there is the education department, where now we focus on outreach, education, and one of our favorite things, prevention. Our job in my department is to put us out of business. If we can end this issue, then that's fantastic.
Totally.
If we could even, end it or, nip it in the bud for one individual or one family, that makes a huge difference for us.
So tell us more about prevention. How can all of us be parts of your army?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, get in touch with me and learn about all the different educational options we have, and invite us to come speak with your community, your business, your group, your school, your class, what have you. We have several different programs. So when it comes to youth, I provide a teen dating violence curriculum that we've been growing and adapting over the years to stay, in touch and on the finger on the pulse of what the teens need and are talking about.
What I love about that, Amelia, not to cut you off, but
no, you're good.
What you teach in that is how to identify a healthy relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And not, I remember years ago, we always have May Van come and speak at women's events that we're doing. She's from DVCCC, and she gave us these bookmarks, and it was, here's what a healthy relationship looks like. Here's what a not healthy relationship looks like. And she was, teaching the teens. And I thought, oh my gosh, so helpful, because they don't know. I mean, their first relationship is their first relationship,
Exactly.
or their second or their third. So how do they know? And it's not love, but it can be disguised as love. And so really knowing that difference is so helpful. And I'm grateful that you're out there doing that work.
Oh yeah. And we started collecting data this year, and we've really seen that the teens have significantly been impacted by the program. They've learned so much from understanding the red flags, those unhealthy behaviors that aren't abuse yet, but are building toward it. So like, what shouldn't I allow in a relationship, kind of a thing, the bookmarks are so helpful. So we do an activity where we have them write qualities of a healthy relationship on their way out. And they love doing that and having to think about it a little harder. Understanding the cycles of abuse and things like that. So we really do that. We go into the high schools. We partner with, I think, over half of the public high schools in Chester County, a few of our local private high schools, and a number of youth organizations that are, not affiliated with any schools at all. For example, the Coatesville Youth Initiative is one of the groups that we work with, and the Garage in Kent Square, and in West Grove. They have 2 locations, so we go and we speak with the teens there as well. And I'll tell you, the teens really take a lot out of that, and so we're hoping to continue to
share this too with everybody.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, this is something you shared with me.
This is the handout that the teens love the most, which is that red flag handout. It just goes over little things that are so common and so normalized among especially teen relationships that they don't understand yet that these are things that can build upon each other and become abuse, that can exacerbate abusive behaviors, and that these are things that are not healthy. While they're not abusive, they're still not healthy, and they're still not things that are keeping us in a healthy, happy relationship. Our other teen program is the Coaching Boys into Men program. That's a prevention program. It's evidence-based, nationally recognized. That's one that's funded through the CDC. And in that program, our Coaching Boys into Men coordinator, Joe, he's fantastic. He's a former military man himself. And he trains the coaches of athletic teams and at the high school level to have, because they're having conversations with their athletes. They are role models for their athletes. They're already fielding these questions. So to give them a curriculum to work off of, to have a regular conversation that each week builds upon the last, and to ask the right questions, to know the right answers. So we've had coaches who've signed onto the program. We've seen significant growth in the program. The guys are better able to identify abuse. They're more likely to stand up to abuse, which is a huge part of it, is that bystander intervention, or upstanding, as we like to call it. And what we've seen is the coaches that sign on to this program say, oh my goodness, I've been trying to do this with our guys for so long, and this gives me a structure to be able to do it right. And
Yes.
so that's fantastic. So the Coach and Boys into Men program is great. Throughout the month of June, we're actually putting out a series of videos on our social media, so you can keep an eye on
Oh,
that.
good. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a Coach and Boys into Men series. So we've partnered with local coaches, athletic directors, leaders, gym owners,
Oh,
and what they're all doing is given a Coach and Boys into Men tip, and then they're given an at-home workout.
oh,
So
so good.
it's a really important
Good for all
thing.
of us.
Exactly. Let's get moving. We are glad to tailor any presentation to the needs of that audience. If they want specific information on, helping people in business, helping people in, this area, in communities of faith,
Yeah.
we will tailor it to the needs of that organization.
That's awesome.
We do a healthcare-based training where in hospitals, nursing schools, doctors' offices, local clinics, we will go in and we will teach the staff about not only how to identify abuse and not just the physical indicators, but behavioral indicators, which are sometimes more important to keep an eye on. But also we teach them a technique to assess and then refer them to our services. And we help them understand what not to do, because there are things that unfortunately our doctors and nurses might do that can unfortunately exacerbate the abuse. For example, if I'm interviewing my patient and their partner is sitting right there, they're not going to answer, yes, I feel unsafe at home with this person,
Right.
So we go over a lot of things, and that's been a fantastic program that we've been growing. And then one of our flagship programs that we've had for the longest time is what we call our LAP program, which is the Lethality Assessment Program.
Okay.
We talked about this a little bit earlier when we talked about unemployment as a lethality factor. This is another nationally recognized evidence-based program in which our law enforcement are trained by our lethality assessment team run by Ashley, who's fantastic, and she's been training the officers and just improving the growth of the program for the past year and a half. And we've seen significant growth and improvement in the program. But what it is it's a way to train our officers to not only recognize victimization when they see it, but to have trauma-informed care, to treat survivors of violence with dignity and respect, and make them feel safe and understand that they can trust these local police officers because they are trained and partnered with the Domestic Violence Center.
Right.
And what they do is they ask 11 questions from an evidence-based questionnaire. Those 11 questions trigger either a low danger or a high danger response. If they are a high danger victim, the officer will pick up their phone and call our hotline right then and there and connect that survivor with our hotline. And this has been a fantastic resource because what they're doing is they're finding the survivors, the victim survivors who are most at risk and connecting them immediately with the services. And sometimes they don't want to talk to us, which is totally fine. And the officer will say, they don't want to talk to you right now. We still get a report of that call. We still understand and count and track that call. However, it's really important to know that 45% of our high danger calls have gone on to receive full-time services, counseling, legal, housing, things like that.
Holy cow.
It's making a huge impact. And actually, in 2019, we received a commendation from the district attorney's office in Chester County for significant reduction of homicides in Chester County.
Wow. Oh my gosh. That's
So,
incredible.
yeah, we're really proud of that
Wow,
program.
it
So
works. So do these
does.
officers have those questions like in their pocket?
Yes. So we send out, stacks and stacks of the assessment so they have it. But actually right now, fingers crossed that it goes through, we're working on getting the funding and moving forward with a LAP app. So the officers will have it on their phone and it'll just come right through electronically. We're keeping up with the times.
And there's all of the parties to celebrate in that, the innovation of like, what do these 11 questions have to be in order for us to have a research-based process to figure out the severity of the situation. Then there's the part of the trainers to figure out how to teach and, transfer learning. And then there's the part of the officers who are implementing this and really saving lives. It's just a
Exactly.
fantastic story. Oh, I love that. So what does the cycle look like, Amelia?
Let's talk about that. I'm going to pull it up on my screen for us.
Okay.
I think this is such a great illustration. This is one of my favorite things to share. All right.
Yep. Perfect.
Cool.
I
So
got a question.
this cycle and the patterns of abuse that we see in these relationships are very similar in most abusive relationships. Now, there's several different theoretical models to describe abusive relationships, but this is one that we see extremely commonly. So it's important to note that all relationships start the same way, as you see here, the honeymoon phase. And we've all heard that phrasing before, you know, it's when we're putting our best foot forward, we're very loving and romantic and exciting. So this time in a relationship is passionate and intense sometimes, but in a good way. This is when we are falling in love, you know. And so this is when we're presenting ourselves in our best light as well. This is such a fantastic time in a relationship. However, as many of us know, especially in healthy relationships, we know the honeymoon goes away. It does. And that's okay. That's healthy. That's normal. The honeymoon should fade away. I say in healthy relationships, we fade from the honeymoon phase into like the comfort and safety phase. I can be fully myself. I feel respected and loved and supported by my partner and safe with them to be myself. Totally. And that's cool. In, unfortunately, an unhealthy cycle or an abusive cycle, we move into what I call the red flag phase. So those red flags that we had pulled up earlier, this is where we start seeing those behaviors, these subtle little things that aren't abusive per se, but they aren't great. And so I call this the status quo also, because as we continue through the cycle, this is where we spend the most time. And so this is where small things happen that are unhealthy, that might make us upset, that might make us a little bit angry and uncomfortable, but it's not abuse, you know? And so what we see happening in this part of the relationship is a lot of rationalization. Oh, they're probably really stressed with work. Oh, they've got a lot going on. Oh, I can get that way sometimes too. And we rationalize the behavior. The other important thing to note, though, about this red flag status quo phase is that normalization is a huge factor that goes into it. People often will ask survivors of abuse, how did you not see what was happening? This is how. Rationalizing and normalizing it. If I look around at relationships around me, we know the statistic of abuse. So the statistic of unhealthy behaviors is probably way higher than that, right?
Yeah. What is the statistic of abuse? I don't actually know that.
One in 3 women and 1 in 4 men. And so if I'm looking around at relationships around me, relationships in my family, relationships among my friends, I might see similar unhealthy red flag behaviors. And so I might think this is just all relationships. Everybody deals with this.
Everybody gets on each other's nerves.
Exactly. And we even hear these things our whole lives. Things like relationships are supposed to be hard. Relationships take hard work. And so when it starts feeling this way, we think, oh, relationships are supposed to be hard. Sometimes you get tough times. Fighting is normal in a relationship, so on and so forth. The other factor with normalization, I think, especially for young people, is the media, television, movies, music. We see so many super toxic relationships wrapped up in a big, pretty bow in the media and presented to us as love and romance. And in the movies, it works out for them in the end. You know, they get chased down in the airport and, oh, I'm so sorry. And everything's all sunshine and roses. And so we might not even see this as not only, you know, not unhealthy, but actually romantic. This is really good stuff. I love this, you know? And so unfortunately, unhealthy behaviors are sometimes not only normalized, but romanticized.
Yes.
Unfortunately, eventually we will reach an abusive incident in these relationships. Again, this can be physical, verbal, emotional, financial. This is where it crosses a line though. This is where I, as the victim survivor in this scenario, this is where I recognize it as an unhealthy, abusive situation. This is where I say, you've crossed a line with me. We all have a breaking point, you know? And so this is where I've acknowledged that. So I can do multiple things here. I can stand up for myself and say to my partner, that can never happen again, or else we're done. I can ask for some space. Hey, I need like a week or two to just be by myself and think things through because what happened was really inappropriate. Another thing that I can do and often will do as a survivor of abuse is end the relationship. It's important to know that the statistic is 4 to 7 breakup attempts before a victim survivor finally breaks the cycle. So this can often happen where I say, we are done.
Yeah.
Then we move into the next phase, apology and reconciliation. So we get the apologies. I'm so sorry. I don't know what got into me. I was like crazy. Work's been stressing me out. And I lashed out and I had been drinking and I've been so stressed and I've been overworked. And we come up with a lot of excuses and they try and rationalize the behavior. Maybe they'll present me with a lot of really beautiful and wonderful gifts. Maybe they're crying. Maybe they're literally like begging and promising change. I promise we'll go to counseling. I promise I'll get help. I promise that will never, ever happen again. They might even say things like, you know, that's not me. You know, that's not the person that I am. I would never want to do that stuff to you. I would never be like that to you, so on and so forth. So they really are going to do and say during this phase everything they need to get you back with them. And we have to understand this isn't just an acquaintance. This is someone that we are in love with. This is someone that is in our family. So this isn't just, you know, cut and dry, we're done. You know, it can be a lot more complicated than that. We want to believe in and see the good in the people that we love and care about. And so after this, maybe I do forgive them and I give it another shot. Here is the unique part of this cycle of abuse is that we get to do something that healthy relationships don't even get to do. We get to revisit that honeymoon phase, back to that extremely romantic, loving, intense, beautiful cloud 9 kind of feeling where they're doting on me, where I feel like this is just perfect. And they are on their best behavior, doing and saying everything that I've needed from them this whole time. Things are better than they've ever been before.
Yeah.
And then, okay, we slowly move back into that status quo and, you know, things aren't always perfect. And then, okay, there was another abusive incident, but you know, things were going really rough with them with work again. And I can see past them and I can help them. I can change them. I can inspire them to be better. And this time when they apologized, they were sobbing. I've never seen them cry like that. I knew that they were sorry. And this time we're actually gonna go to counseling and so on and so forth. And, you know, it's really difficult. I remember being in the cycle myself and saying to friends and family, like, guys, I know when it's bad, but when it's good, it's so good because of that honeymoon phase, because of those behaviors. So I really think that understanding that cycle of abuse is so important to understand, you know, what a survivor of abuse is going through and what they're thinking and experiencing and why it is so difficult and confusing for them. You know, it's not just always abusive. It's not so clear for them.
Yes, I can relate to this as well. And it's familiar, I'm sure, for many people who are hearing your teaching here and helping us to see how that could happen and how to break out of that. And also how to be a friend to someone who's in that, because probably everyone who's with us this morning and who will be watching this can think of someone in their lives who's somewhere in that cycle right now. And the tendency is to say, well, why don't you just leave? Or why don't you just stand up for yourself? Or, you know what, I'm not even talking to you about this anymore.
Yes.
Right. And then, you know, when you just shared about oh, but you don't know, it's so great. And, you know, there's so much love and everything now. When it's good, it's good. So what can you teach us about what to say and what not to say when we're the friend or the family member whose counsel the victim is seeking?
So that's so important. What you just said is that often with the best intentions, like from loving places in our hearts, we think, I'm doing this to help them. I'm going to be able to help them. This is going to be something supportive that I say or do. And we tell them, you need to, and we tell them what to do.
Yes.
And a lot of times we prescribe breaking up with this person or divorce or what have you. And we don't consider the difficulties in that. We don't consider the manipulation. We don't consider those factors. And we don't consider that it's almost reminiscent of, substance use disorder, right? Where we know no matter what I say as a friend or loved one, they have to see it themselves to break free from that. It's the same thing with abuse. And so there's a couple key things, and I can put up a slide if it's a little helpful for everyone. But let me get that up here. There's a few key things that I will always tell people to do when they're helping someone. The first is to come into the situation with a completely non-judgmental approach. The reason I say that is because unless it is you, it's not you. So what you would do and what you think they should do doesn't pertain to their unique individual situation. They are a completely different person from you with different life experiences and backgrounds. And so you can't prescribe what you think is best for someone else. And so to judge them for the choices that they're making is not being supportive. I always say judgment and support are complete opposites. And unfortunately, as a survivor, I know that that's a lot of what we experience from our friends and loved ones is judgment. How could you stay with this? How could you, I hate when people say, how could you allow that to happen to you? And things like that. So we have to step outside of that and go into a situation listening to our friends and empathizing with them, completely non-judgmental, leave it all at the door. The next thing is to just listen. And the reason I say that is because I know a lot of us, I'm sure, and I'm sure you can relate, have vented to somebody about what we're going through. And they start giving you a bunch of advice that you weren't really looking for or asking for. You just needed to get it all out.
Yeah.
Be the person who just lets them get it out. They're not asking for what to do. They just need to share it. The other important thing is we talked about before when it came to gaslighting behaviors and manipulation, their experience, their feelings about the abuse will never be validated by their partner. Their partner is actually actively invalidating those experiences. It didn't happen like that. You're overreacting. You're being crazy. You need to calm down, so on and so forth. So be the person, because you might be the first one who validates their feelings and experience. What happened was not okay. That is not healthy. That is not normal. How did you feel? I would have felt the same way. I think anyone would have felt that way. Validate their feelings and experience. Help them take ownership again of those things. And if they try to invalidate their feelings, don't let them. No, you weren't being crazy. You weren't overreacting. That was unacceptable. You know what I mean? That's a huge important factor. One thing we have to do is, like we say, we can give them options, right? So we can say, you can break up with them. You can leave them. You can call the domestic violence center. You can call this hotline. You can come stay at my house if you feel safe doing that. Give them different options. But you have to support whatever choice they make. And I hate to say this, and I know people hate hearing me say this. They get really upset when I say this, but one of the options has to be stay with them and work it out if you feel like that's the right thing to do right now. And the reason I have to let them know that, and let them know that no matter what you choose, even if you stay, I'm still here for you, is because if I don't let them know that, and then they do end up doing that, they do end up staying, which 4 to 7
7
times. Yeah.
times. Yes.
They might end up staying. They won't want to come talk to me about it
Mm-hmm.
because they might feel like I will judge them, or they might feel ashamed or
Mm-hmm.
embarrassed that they didn't take that other advice. They might
So,
not
like, go ahead.
they might not think that I'm going to support them and be okay and still have their back.
So do that cautiously, right? To say like that is an
Yes.
option, but don't pile on to be like, because you know he actually really does have good days.
Exactly.
You know,
To
so you don't
say,
have to embellish, but just to say, you know, it is an option because it is an option.
one of the best things one of my best friends said to me in my relationship was, I don't agree with the way that you're treated in this relationship, and I don't think that this is the be all end all relationship for you, but if you are going to choose this time to make it work, I still have your back.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you can say things like that. You can let them know, I don't think this is healthy for you,
Mm-hmm.
but if you're not ready to leave,
Yeah,
that's cool too. I'll
mm-hmm.
still be here for you, because they need to know that you're going to be there non-judgmentally no matter what.
Yeah, that's a
And then the one thing that
yes.
we talked about is so important is to remind them of their worth.
Mm-hmm.
Because with the verbal and emotional abuse, their partner is actively, consistently working on discrediting their worth, on breaking down their sense of self-worth and self-confidence and self-love,
Yeah.
is making them feel incapable and small and weaker. And, you know, you lose touch of who you are and what your strengths are
Mm-hmm.
when you're in a relationship like that. And so to have friends and family who are consistently and actively working to combat that, who
Mm-hmm.
are actively working to remind you of your worth. You are funny. You are smart. You are fun to be around. You are loving. You are, you know,
Courageous.
so on and so forth. Exactly. Courageous and amazing and empowering and so on and so forth. It's so important to combat that, to actively be building back up what that person is actively destroying.
Yes.
And loving them the right way, because I often will say, you know, love is love. Love is a verb. It's an action. It doesn't matter if it's family, friends, partners. Love is what it is. So if I am loving my friends the right way, my family members the right way, I lift them up to like a higher place where they feel good and happy and safe.
Yeah.
And if I'm showing them that kind of love, what I'm also able to do is draw a contrast between what love really looks and feels like and what their relationship looks and feels like.
Mm-hmm.
I remember feeling that myself, being with my good friends who made me feel so much love and feeling like it lifted me out of that fog that the abuse caused, so I could see above it and be like, I like it up here much better.
Yes. Yes.
I like to be elevated by love and the people that care about me. So
totally.
That's a huge part of it. And I got to say, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's a long game. So take care of yourself as a loved one as well. If this is something that's stressing you out, you can take a break yourself from, you know, giving to these people, because it can be stressful and it can be difficult to see someone continue to go back.
Right? And it feels
Yes.
like
And
they
so
don't listen.
don't forget to focus on yourself and make sure that you're also actively taking care of yourself when you're helping with these things.
There was a question about how to educate young girls, like middle school, high school.
Unfortunately, we've had trouble getting into middle schools. A lot of middle schools don't think that their students are ready for these conversations. I would disagree. I think that these students are very ready to have these conversations and need to have these conversations. Talking about those red flags, the cycles that those relationships go through, because if they're understanding those cycles, they're going to be able to identify them in their dating relationships, and also helping them understand what a healthy relationship looks like versus unhealthy. But the other thing is, if you have like a middle schooler or high school, you know, student at home, is modeling these behaviors in your own home with your own, you know, relationships, and showing, you know, equal and loving and healthy relationships at home, because a lot of young people model their first relationships on their parents or their guardians,
Yeah.
the relationships they're seeing at home.
Yeah, that's great advice. So the last thing I would love for you to do is to share your wall art with us.
We have a ribbon up there. That's just an awareness ribbon. So the color for domestic violence awareness is purple. It says love shouldn't hurt. But when I saw this and read this quote, I thought it really encompassed a lot of the work that we do here and our mindset here at the Domestic Violence Center. So it says, be kind, work hard, stay humble, smile often, stay loyal, be honest, travel when possible, never stop learning, be thankful, and love always.
Thank you, Amelia.
Of course, thank you so
sharing
much.
your time with us and for educating us and for all the work you're doing for all of those people on the other end of that phone.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share our mission. We really, really appreciate it.